Press go live, Harry. Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to join me on an exploration of what makes the Elm City tick. Alan Hadelman is ticking mad, along with some other folks in town, about the 11% tax increase the Board of Alders just passed. Mohit Agarwal is quite concerned because, as head of the city's independent financial review board, he's been looking at the numbers, at the long-term picture about our finances. They're both here in the WNHH studio to help us figure out where the city's headed or how to keep it headed in a good place. Welcome, gentlemen, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mohit.
Thank you, Paul.
Good morning, Alan.
Good to be here.
So, Alan, you've been around New Haven a long time. You know, you're not a household name except for many people whose households send rent checks to you. But you've been around. Did you grow up here, Alan?
Yes.
And you've been here since, what, the 50s?
Yeah.
40s?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
And you became one of the major property owners in town.
Yeah. I was doing that, and I also participated in a lot of inner city stuff, coaching.
Oh, you do a lot of sports coaching and boxing as well.
And I did boxing, but I also did a lot of inner city midnight basketball. I was responsible for, and
wow,
and also getting after school athletic programs for both the junior high schools to be feeder programs for the high schools when things were really bad here.
And how many units do you own in town that you rent out?
In New Haven, I own around 400.
Wow. Okay. So you have a lot at stake. You pay a lot of taxes. What do you pay every year in taxes before the increase?
I have no idea. I mean, and again, that's part of the issue with me. But there's
let's tell people what the issue is. We just passed a $547 million budget in New Haven.
Right.
Operating budget for next year.
Yep.
It includes an 11% increase in everybody's taxes.
Yes.
So you're not happy about that. You think this is a really big deal, right?
I think it's a really big deal, not only for landlords, but I think it's also people are, I think the picture that's being portrayed and what's really going to go on here is very different for a couple reasons. Number one, as people know, in the year, I think it was 2016, there was a reappraisal in New Haven. And yes, East Rock, where most of my properties in Westville are, we got tremendous increases. But even if you're living in another area, which is not where I'm involved, which would be like Fairhaven or New Hallville or East Shore, when these people get their tax bills, two things are going to happen. Number one, they're going to be very surprised. And number two, if they really think about it, people who are renting are going to be just as much affected by this as homeowners.
Because the landlords pass it on.
Well, they have to. I mean, and they're not going to be able to pass an 11% increase on, but they're going to have to pass something on.
So they'll take less profit on the building, and they'll also have to still raise the rent.
Yes, and the other thing that I think people should understand is it's going to make the city a lot less attractive for people, especially young people, to want to move here. Because when they see the taxes and what's going on here and what the Board of Aldermen is passing, they're going to say to themselves, this probably isn't such a great deal for us because it's going to be economically a very difficult situation for most middle class people.
Mohit, do you agree with that it was a mistake to raise taxes 11%? Can you talk right in the mic?
Sure. Let me say that what the budget required was probably a tax increase of around 20% in order to balance the spending that was in there.
Right. Just so people know, you've intensely studied this as part of the Financial Review Accountability Commission. Is that the name of it?
Financial Review and County Commission.
And what you guys said was that this was not an honest budget. That in fact, it is not balanced, that if you're going to continue spending at the level it's at, which is a 1.5% spending increase, it's not an 11% increase. But, we got less money from the state, and certain costs go up for insurance and health insurance and contractual obligations. But you were saying that if they really passed a budget that added up, it would be a 20%, not an 11% increase.
At a minimum. So Financial Review and Audit Commission, let me get that right.
Sorry.
No, that's my fault. And so back in our report in March, we issued in May with extra addendums. We find that the mayor's budget has, at least a $27 million deficit, and that could be up to 50 if you look at our numbers for the financial year that's just about to close. Mayor.
But you said that 27 to 50 is for next year.
It's for next year. So for the year that's just about to close, we found between 35 to 55, and the real number is going to come in the high 40s. So I think we're on the ball here when we're saying 27 to 50. Now, the Board of Alders did find some savings. Yale did come to the table with some extra pilots. So, it may not be 27, it might be 20. But we're still looking at, what is that, 7 digits of 8 digits of a deficit. So there's still, tens of millions of dollars that are not going to be
So how do you
for.
think Alan Hanimel's right that it was a mistake to raise taxes?
So, this is where the political process needs to, have its way, and we need to figure out what is the right way for New Haven to move forward. We need these taxes to pay for our services. At the same time, if the market doesn't value those services, if homeowners and renters don't value those services, then they're going to leave. And then, of course, there's a broader structural issue in the state of Connecticut where our cities face these, relatively disadvantaged populations, lower property prices on average, and so our cities have, this crucible of financial issues, and all of our cities in Connecticut have high mill rates, and so it's not just a New
towns like
Haven
West
issue.
Haven and Hamden. Jack Newell writes in Highway to Hell, little AC/DC reference there. Mimi Sunshine says the key word here was spending increase. How about counting that? I'm glad I left Connecticut. Nice to hear from you, Mimi and Jake. Thanks for listening to Dateline New Haven. So, Alan, you and Mohit are saying two very strong things. They don't necessarily line up. You're saying, Alan, there's no way you should raise taxes 11% because it's drive everybody out. Mohit isn't disagreeing with you, agreeing with you. It sounds like he's saying we have even less. If we really were balancing this budget and we wanted to pay for the things we're paying for right now in New Haven, we actually would have had to raise them 20%, and we would not have been out of line with what other cities and towns are charging for taxes right now because of structural problems. So what do we do about that, Alan? Would your renters be unhappier with your taxes going up? I mean, their rent going up 5%, or would they be unhappier if we cut a quarter of the police force or stop picking up the trash? If that really is the choice, right? So which would you do?
Well, I'm not quite sure that's accurate what you just said. I mean, I do think this. I mean, I'm not going to get into what should be cut, but any prudent,
but you gotta. You can't criticize them without saying
no,
that.
I agree with that. But any prudent business person would say there's got to be some cuts here because you're just going to get yourself in deeper and deeper. And if they're talking about 20 million and possibly going to 35 to 40 million, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there's got to be either some furloughs, some cuts. You have the police department, you have the fire department, you have other departments. And if it was me, instead of enacting a severe increase like this, I think there should be an increase. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I mean, if it was even 5%, I think people could accept that. But to do it this severe, it really has some negative implications on the economy in the city.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that, Alan.
And I think that what I would have done is I would have gone through every department and said, look, you're going to have to cut your budget 5%. There's no choice here. Because if I was running a business and I had deficits, what am I going to do?
So if they cut it 5%, you still would have had to raise taxes 6%, right, Mohit?
It depends on which
And the
budgets.
things you can't cut, right? You have contractual obligations. You just can't cut.
Right, but I'm saying that at least
that's a big part,
at least,
though, to pay.
But to give people raises, and then psychologically.
So you think people shouldn't get raises?
Well, it's not that I'm trying to go after people. That's just not the point.
No, I know you're not. I'm
It's
saying,
not
what
that
would But you're talking about the 37 raises the mayor
Yes,
gave.
yeah.
Now that's to her top aides and confidential employees. Now you realize they haven't gotten a raise in 4 years.
Yeah, but it sends a terrible message, and the timing is awful. I mean.
Okay, so you're talking about perception, which is important because
Yes.
people make decisions based on perception. But what about reality? What should she do?
Reality is, if I was doing this job, I would at least show people that we're going to make some cuts here, so that we're going in the right direction. Otherwise, it's just going to it's going to perpetuate. It can't.
Okay, so I think partly what you're saying, Alan Hadelman, is that if you're going to do a large tax increase, first of all, keep it single digits rather than double. Don't accompany it with any new spending. Cut it with cuts to show people you're cutting.
That's right.
And give a blanket charge to your department heads to cut 5%.
Yes, and the reason I'm saying that clearly is because if people would just think about it, let's say you're a new homeowner and you moved here a year and a half ago. I mean, I read one piece in your newspaper where one guy said he's been in his house for 1 year. His property taxes have increased 25%.
Oh, that must be where they did the reassessment. Now, that was a whole issue.
No, that was reassessment plus the 11%.
Reassessment was really, I really feel, even though they're some of the wealthiest taxpayers in town, I feel very sympathetic for the people in East Rock, and here's why. For the last 10 years, almost all of the increase in property values in New Haven has come in East Rock. So, I mean, so the houses are worth more, but they have to pay more taxes, but they can sell them for more. And it's not like you feel sorry or not sorry for that, but because of the way we reevaluate property in Connecticut, we don't do it every year. You get creamed if your neighborhood did well. So it's not that we feel sorry your neighbor did well. So what happened was that we didn't raise taxes last year, but if you lived in East Rock, you got this huge tax increase while everybody else has stayed the same or went down just because of how property values changed. So I think maybe we should have phased that in the way John DeStefano did years back, and I understood that. Oh, by the way, Sam writes in, it's a terrible message that hard work shouldn't be compensated by more income. And Jake Newell writes in, I am a new homeowner. I've been in New Haven 3 years, and my taxes have gone up 30%. I'm guessing Jake lives in Westfield. Now, does the tax increase show up in the bill we got July 1st? Because my bill came in the same amount it was before.
Well, you're lucky. Because
but mine's supposed to go up $600.
And most people, for what I'm told,
I mean, not 660, yeah.
And there's one other point that I think we should make, and this is probably not.
I'm sorry, it should have been 730 more. Yeah.
And I might be a little off on this, but I don't think too far, because when I was involved with I was the finance chair for Bill Curry when he ran for governor, and he used to property tax was a big issue with him, and he told me something, and I'm not sure that my facts are 100%, but he said that people in New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport pay a higher per capita property tax than they do in Greenwich.
Mm. Oh, yeah, we know that. Yeah.
And which is
the
just,
same car costs more. And that has to be fixed at the state level. If you have the same car in New Haven, you pay twice the taxes in Greenwich.
There's no question about it.
But that's because we have racist suburbs that just want to throw all the problems in cities but take the advantage of tax breaks.
But I'm not even in...
Oh, by the way, Jake Newell lives in Edgewood. That's so interesting. His taxes went up 30% in Edgewood because the values didn't go up in Edgewood. And they're going to go down now with all that property owned by Rabbi Greer that's going to be abandoned pretty soon. It's already going down. And that's a big hit to that neighborhood. But anyway, so I want to ask Mohit. So, I have to tell you, just to be honest, I did what Alan Hadelman did. I always try to put myself in the position of the people I write about before I criticize them. Mm-hmm. And I actually told myself that if I were the mayor, I think what I would do was come in and say, everyone has to give me a plan to cut their taxes. I mean, their budget's 15% because there are so many things we can't touch. Now, I also realized then I put myself in the position of Tony Harp, the mayor, and before her, John DeStefano. And they have a feeling that I think is also legitimate that they have cut services so extremely. They're doing so much more with less than, like, you have half the people in the Parks Department doing what they used to do through innovation. And they have, like, in Public Works, they've done that. And they think at a certain point after you've done that, and Tony Harp very graciously credits John DeStefano with most of that heavy lifting. They've continued some of that, like new advances since he was mayor about how you're more energy efficient, things like that. But they have always argued that you still have to think big as about a city, that if you provide less service than what people want, or if you don't invest in your infrastructure or in having enough cops on the street of your schools, you're going to continue to have less value in your city. So it's a race to the bottom, so that while you might cut, and if you do what Alan and Paul say, Alan would have done a 5%, Paul would have done a 15%, and tell them you just got to cut it, they say at a certain point when you're actually looking at what you're doing, people are going to be madder and have less value in their city and be more likely to leave because they're scared there isn't a cop on the block, or because we're not growing our businesses and they have to pay a greater burden of taxes. What do you think, Mohit?
Let me make 2 points. First, on the $200,000 raises that the mayor's top aides are getting. I mean, $200,000 is a lot of money. I'm not going to speak to...
That's a total for 37 people, many of whom had not gotten a raise for 4 years.
Exactly, and I'm not going to speak to...
I would never not want them to get raises every once in a while.
And my point here is that $200,000 is not going to make or break the city, right? So the city's...
No, but Alan's point was visuals and timing. And Tony Harp's the kind of person that says, I'm not going to play that game.
One of the reasons I'm here is so that the city can get, and the city's residents can be more informed about the budget. Let's talk about the issues that really drive our budget issues. And, number one up there are pensions and medical. So, in our pension system, we're paying $400,000 a year to advisors from Morgan Stanley. right? So if we want to complain about hundreds of thousands of dollars, why don't we start there?
And are we getting benefit from that? Like, what would we do instead if we didn't spend that? Could we spend zero and get a good enough return?
So overall, we spend about $2 million in fees in our pension plans. That's for investment managers and for Morgan Stanley. They're the ones who, are supposed to have the big picture in mind. They're the ones who bring in new deals to the city. If we move towards 80 or 90% passive, which is what many forward-thinking pension plans are doing, the state of Nevada has done this. Several counties in Pennsylvania have done this. This is what the Yale SOM faculty would recommend. We would save 80 or 90% of those costs. So,
now, does that come out of the general fund or does that come out of the pension funds?
So that comes out of the pension funds, but over time,
This is another big issue we haven't gotten to yet,
absolutely.
Alan. We're going to get to because it affects, as I understand it, the way pension funds affect us is A, it hurts the whole city's credit rating if your pension funds aren't funded well, but B, you take money out of the general fund to fund the pension fund every year, and that we've been underfunding it so that it's less and less funded, which creates a brewing crisis.
And we're 40% funding. We didn't put in $16 million this year that we were expected to. I mean, our pension funds are very quickly inching towards crisis.
So, Alan, what do you think about that? So you're saying they shouldn't have raised taxes 11%. That included taking $16 million that they were supposed to put in the general fund toward pensions last year to plug the last deficit, and probably doing that again. Alan, if you were in charge, and remember, I'm sitting with you, Alan. I'm the kind of person who sits on the outside, and I still kind of believe this in my soul, that you could tell them you just got to cut it 50%, no way around, government's going to do less. But I understand there are very good arguments otherwise. It's easier to say on the outside. But would you really, if you were in charge, think it would make sense to not raise taxes more and just keep underfunding the pensions?
No, I don't think I'd do that. I mean, I think, again, you made a statement before, like if let's say the Board of Education obviously is a very controversial.
And they have big budget problems. They have like $5 million they got to cut like right
And
away.
and
they close
they were
schools.
$14 million over in the current fiscal year.
Yeah.
But the question, what I think the big question here is the management of the fire department, the police department, the Board of Education. When you say that there might be some cuts, the question is it a small cut going to really have a tremendous impact on the quality?
Well, right now
of life?
I get calls, Alan, right or wrong, that one woman called me last week and said there was an intruder. My alarm went off, and we were hiding in a bedroom. A cop didn't come for half an hour. Luckily, the guy left.
I don't think
she said they told him there was only one officer on in the shift for the whole side of the city. So if you cut the cops, you're not going to have another cop there. I mean, what do you think about that? You think
that might be an isolated situation, but
I'm told
not,
by the cops it's a regular situation.
But see, I'm not there, and it's hard for me to really evaluate that. My point is that you have to do something. I don't think if you cut some slots in the fire department, police department, and the Board of Education, I'm convinced that there's a lot of duplicity. I think that there's a lot of they could streamline it a lot better than they do. And it just seems that if they don't do
How
something,
would they streamline it, according to you? Like
eliminate some of these positions.
But you'd have fewer firefighters?
Maybe we'd have to have a few.
Okay, I promise you there'll be 10 times as many protests in New Haven if you eliminated firefighters than if you raised taxes. I'm going by history. Do you remember when John Stefano was trying to close a firehouse because all the studies said not a single life would be in danger? And do you remember the outcry on that?
I do remember that, but again, this situation is going to continue unless either something's got to give here.
So something's got to give, and Mohit, what can give? Like at the fire department, the police department, how much are we over in overtime? It's big, right? It's
absolutely. I have these numbers right in front of me. So overtime was supposed to be $4 million in police. In the current fiscal year, they're hitting $7 million. For fire, it was supposed to be $2 million. They're hitting $4.5 million. So we're over by over $5 million in overtime just there. So the question then is, are we just perpetually under budgeting overtime, or are the police and fire departments being poorly managed?
So what do you think?
It's going to be a combination of both. Absolutely.
But how about specifics? You've looked at it.
So
for instance, last year when we just passed our budget, after we passed the budget last year, the next week, the state government told us we are no longer running the pre-detention lockup at Whaley. The New Haven Police Department has to do it, and you have to pay for it.
Sure. So I think that was a couple years ago. I remember seeing those numbers. at the time. And yeah, I mean, it cost us, I think, around $1 million for the year. It wasn't the end of the world, but it wasn't good money, good use of our money either. So with regards to the state, we've lost about $5 million in the budget that was passed in October of 2017. We lost about another $1 million in the budget that was revised about a month ago. So, our city is, at best, just treading water when it comes to state funding. So that's something we have to keep in mind, that we do need to budget in a situation where the state isn't providing as much as it used to.
And by the way, Ashley McKernan writes in, thank you for listening. The department's already taking away pensions to due members. Taking away more from the NHFD and NHPD is not the answer.
When it comes to where we can save money, I mean, we know where the biggest lines are in the budget, right? We know that pensions are huge. We know that medical expenses are huge. We know that police and fire are huge, right? Those are our major expenses. And so, I think it's a little bit too simplistic to say let's cut 5% across the board, because we've probably made over a 20-year period 40 or 50% cuts to the areas where we can make those cuts easily enough. And now we're talking about some of the biggest
we're now at bone. Can we cut bone? And my question earlier to you, I was saying that like Alan, I do step back and say, if I had a business, I just got to do it, and you do 15%. But then I'm thinking, does that then in this long term get you less revenue because your city's declining?
So, I mean, I think it's got to be a multifaceted solution, right? There needs to be, the state needs to be at the table, Yale, other major property owners need to be at the table, and then the unions and our cost basis from the city side need to be at the table. And
what should we ask the unions for? For instance, the police union. We lost the class of 2015 of police cadets, right? They just got on the force. Do you know that 11 of them have already left the force? Most of them stolen away by other departments. They might pay $4,000 penalty if it's too soon. Otherwise, they don't have to pay anything, because they get our good cops as soon as we train them, and they've been on the street because we pay so much less. So we don't have the money. We lose the cops. What do we do about that?
You're absolutely right. And our police department's gotten so much better over the last 10 years. Right. So one of the side jobs of a FRAC commissioner is to sit on the city's litigation commission. And so, we see everything that comes through. And I can say that I have been blown away by how much better the police department has been functioning over the last.
How do you measure that
years.
on the litigation committee?
I'm not sure there are any hard measures that we have. We probably should. I'm just looking at the cases that we come across.
And what do you see in those cases?
Mostly that they're from pre-2010. I think a lot of
a lot fewer people are suing.
Exactly. I think our police department's been run in a lot better fashion, and I think they're treating
I would
the
actually
people
agree
fairly.
with that. So I'm just wondering, what do we do? Like, for instance, I'll give you what ifs. I've been in Alan's frame of mind lately. So I've been saying, if I were in the position of these people who know more than I do how to make these tough decisions, I might say, I love the idea of promoting small business in New Haven. I would still say maybe you have to get rid of the economic development team that does small business. They're good. They do the job well. We care about it. But maybe you just have to say that we just can't do that anymore. People in the police department tell me, maybe we just shouldn't do background checks for other places. It's not some of these things are profit centers. So if you get rid of someone who gives tickets out, you're actually going to lose money. But I mean, I'm not sure that adds up the kind of money you're talking about.
I was about to say, well, I don't think the small business division is going to.
It's a couple of people. And then everyone always says get rid of the mayor's driver, which is one person. But I mean, how many people would you need?
Well, I think there's one other thing you have to take into account here.
Because Mohit's totally right. It doesn't add up to the number.
If you continue on this path, think about what the implications will be long term here in terms of people wanting to come here and spend money. Because that's an issue.
But then if you're not cleaning the sidewalk, or if you're not keeping them safe from getting mugged, they also won't want to come.
But see, those are very general statements. I mean, it depends on how things are being managed. I mean,
you have an assumption here, which I kind of do when I'm in the Allen frame of mind, which I've been lately, which is just you magically can do it. You just have to do it.
Yes.
I'm not sure we're right on the ground. Like, the police department feels like oftentimes they don't have. One reason their overtime is so high is that they have to have somebody on the street certain places. The fire department, which I guess we would disagree with some of their minimum manning requirements in the or womaning requirements in the contracts, but it's not like tomorrow we're going to get that changed. They have to pay someone overtime so they go there. They've been trying to hire more cadets.
But
to do that.
I think his point is really right on. If you're going to make any progress here, you got to bring all these parties together.
But that's not new. John DeStefano did it. Tony Harp did it. I mean, everyone does it.
But this is different because it's different for this because the impact of this increase is going to have people a lot more fired up than they were before. When you got a 3%, 4%, it was fine. When you get an 11% increase after revals, it's going to get people very, very riled up. The one thing you don't want to do is make the city not attractive for people to come here.
But how can you do it if you cut back the spending on public services?
Well, the question is, I think his point is well taken. You bring people to the table, and you attempt at least to get something done here.
And I would argue, Alan, it's been attempted, and they're still attempting, and they got Yale to pay more. They got Yale New Haven to pay more.
How much did Yale put in? Like $2.5 million?
But that's on top of what, Mohit? Is it like $11 million?
It's they had 8.7 before, so they're at 11.2.
So now they're about $11 million.
Yeah.
And then they pay about $5 million on their commercial property.
So I think we would probably agree that Yale should pay $30 million. But at some point, the number runs out, right? At some point, as Mohit said, and as Alan, I know you agree, because you work for Billy Curry, which is that we have a property tax system that basically stacks the odds against cities and inner ring suburbs, so they can't actually pay the bills.
Well, that is true. But I mean, see, the other thing that was brought up, and we haven't actually discussed it, is that when you ask people in the city, well, what's going on here? They say, well, Hartford, there's no property tax increase because they got, I think, $50 million, and ours were cut back.
But Mohit, don't they pay more taxes in Hartford than New
Hartford
Haven?
has a higher tax rate than New Haven.
Effective tax rate.
Exactly. Putting that aside,
and
Hartford,
Bridgeport does too, right?
They do too.
And Hamden and West Haven?
I believe so.
So, Alan, you got higher taxes in these other places. We're all facing the same stuff.
Yeah, but I think if my memory serves me correctly,
and I wouldn't want to live in those other places.
Well, West Hartford's not. But if it is it true that $50 million there was a discrepancy? I mean, in terms.
So with Hartford's budget, if you compare Hartford, if you have a piece of paper that has Hartford's main numbers, another one with New Haven's, it'd be very difficult to say which city is which. Which city is the one that just got a state bailout, and which city is trying to make it on its own. Both of our cities had fundamentally the same issue, which is a $30, $40, $50 million a year structural budget deficit. Hartford made some very tough decisions, and the state came to the table to help them out at the same time.
What do you mean by tough decisions?
Union contracts, right? So in Hartford, it was 3 to 5 years of grinding union contract renegotiations, and once the state felt that the city had done enough, and that their property taxes had been raised, they were in the 60-some mills at some point, and now they're up at 74.
Although they with 30%,
they have a different
80% assessment for
evaluation system, exactly. But those are still high numbers, even when you scale them down to be comparable. And so Hartford made the hard decisions, and the state felt that that they had done their part, and that now it was time for the state to make good, because the state and the structure of municipalities in our state make it difficult for urban centers like Hartford to really be able to pay their bills. The state hasn't been so forthcoming with New Haven, and now the question is that because
we don't want to be put under a review board that tells us how we run the city. And Alan, it's not that they gave them $50 million. Didn't they guarantee $50 million of their debt or something, or pay down their debt?
So it's effectively $40 million a year, and so they've guaranteed the $505 or $550 million general obligation debts that they had. Wow.
So that's a big, and we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven and WNHH FM 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. We're your home for community radio, and we're talking about the big issue in town right now, which is the 11% tax increase and the structural budget deficit, from people with two perspectives that aren't opposite, but they come at it from different places. Alan Hadelman, a lifelong New Havener, community volunteer, and big property owner, who is upset about the tax increases. He doesn't know how much his taxes are going up. His concern is what it's going to mean for renters and other property owners and people leaving the city. And we have Mohit Agarwal, who is the head of, and he's really, I would consider him pretty much the most knowledgeable person in town about what this big picture is all about, because he's in the weeds. And he's the head of the Financial Review and Audit Commission. So the other big thing we talk about is pensions. And Alan, this does get back to Texas too, because we're not putting enough in our pension plan. So we are underfunding our pensions, and the city this year wanted to borrow $250 million to pay off that pension debt. Mohit, and I agreed with him, just to be honest here, thought that was a terrible idea, because that's just putting you at your more risk down the line rather than making the tough decision. So it didn't happen. So then they ended up just not putting enough in the pensions to pay off some of the deficit from last year. So Mohit, where do we go now?
Sure. So let me make 2 points. One is to correct a not small error in a recent Independent article. So
not the first
I think you mixed around our funded versus unfunded. So our unfunded liability, how much we need to put in our pension plans, is around $900 million, and we have about $430 in them. So we're about 1/3, a little bit more than 1/3 funded. And that's a significant issue. So our pension plans right now are basically in the ICU because every dollar that goes in or that we make in the markets goes out to pay current retirees. And so we're really not making any water. We're not making any progress in our pension plans. And that really is, the albatross around New Haven's neck. So we have about $2 billion in overall deficits. 900 million of that is in our pension plans. Another 500 to 600 million is general obligation bonds, and another 500 to 600 million is in OPEB. That's retiree costs, primarily for healthcare. So OPEB costs are a weird thing. You can pay them over time if you so choose. So we have at least $1.5 billion in true debt. We are the most indebted city per capita in the state of Connecticut.
Wow.
Over $10,000 per person. So, so when we talk about the issues that face our city, we have to keep in mind the long-term perspective, which is that our debt is really starting to suffocate.
Is that from building the schools or what?
The general obligation bonds reflect some of the school debt, though I believe the state pays is it 80%. So it's not as if the total cost of schools is something that we have.
They pay between 80 and 95 depending on the school.
Yeah.
So what's most of that debt from? Is it from bridges?
It's everything. Oh, absolutely.
So, but what do we borrow more for than other cities do?
Our general obligation bonds are pretty similar to what they are in Hartford. I don't know about Bridgeport.
So why are we doing more? What are we getting for that?
Oh, so every year we have a capital project plan, right? So every year the city goes to the alders and say, here's a list of 100 projects we want to pursue. New roofs on buildings, pothole repairs.
And some of it, right, has been making energy efficient buildings, so we save money over time.
Absolutely. So the alders have become much more interested in reviewing these projects and making sure that we need to take on this debt. And in some sense, capital projects are easy debt to take on because they make sense, that people see things, and you don't pay it off for 20 years. But, I agree with the alders that we need to be very careful about our spending today because these numbers snowball over time very, very quickly.
So you gave us one very specific suggestion, which was to no longer pay outside managers to manage 80 to 90%, go passive investment for our pensions.
Exactly.
But that would save in the pension fund, which has a rebound effect on our budget. Can you give me any specifics of city budget we can cut? I mean, you've looked at it so closely. You're saying, the ideas I had, and I don't want to cut the economic development small business plan. These are good people doing good work. But I'm just saying, if I had to cut, would we cut things like that? What could we cut that would add up?
That's a hard question. It's a hard question. So like I said, we have a structural budget deficit of maybe $30 million now after the tax increase. Mm-hmm. And so we need to find $30 million, either in new revenue or in cuts. And what cuts can we make? I looked at the pension plan quite closely. I think we could save $1 to $2 million a year right there.
Is that in the $30 million? I thought that was in the pension plan as opposed to the operating budget.
Exactly. And so those $1 to $2 million don't translate exactly into $1 to $2 million in the general fund. There would be some savings. If you look at what's in the general fund, we have these large costs. We've already taken the $5 million away that was requested by the mayor for the schools. Do we want to go further? Under current law, we can't because Alliance schools have to be kept at a certain level.
The minimum education requirement.
But, a new legislature could change that. Do we want to go further? I don't know. As a notice to listeners, FRAC is meeting on July 17th. It's a Tuesday at 5 p.m. in City Hall, and we will be meeting with senior staff from the New Haven Public Schools to discuss their budget and to really understand what the situation is over there.
For instance, the cops. There are some people who believe we can get rid of 60 cops.
So let me
Other people think that would destroy community policing. Other people say that was always a myth. The cops who walk will walk anyway and get out of their cars, and the ones who don't really want to walk will hide in corners, and that you can manage better. I think any politician would be creamed if they cut 60 cops. Now, whether or not it caused more crime as soon as you have crime, which is typical, Alan, all your renters are going to be really mad at them. Would you cut 60 cops? But also pay them a little more to keep them?
Again, I'm not privy to exactly what's going on. But what I do believe is maybe somebody from the outside, he's talking about Morgan Stanley and paying $4 million. We're talking about the fire department. Somebody must come in there from the outside and really do a very objective, independent study to see what is really going on here.
But FRAC's kind of doing that.
Well, I haven't.
They're saying there's no easy answers.
There's no easy answers, but no matter what you do, what's the definition of a good deal? A definition of a good deal is when two people get together. You're never going to get everything you want, but you're going to walk out of there and say it's okay. There has to be some compromise here. Because we can sit here and talk. We're not going to cut this. We're not going. And then what are we? Then we're just looking at larger deficits going forward. And if right now we're the number one, you're saying we're the number one city in the state in debt, what other choice do you have? And I go back to this. Talk about the mood of the city. Let's say you're a person in Fairhaven or in New Hallville and you buy your first house and then you get your tax bill. How many people who are just about trying to make it and they're buying a house and they get hit with this and they're probably saying to themselves, well, look, the deficit now projected could be 20 to 25 million. In another year or two, it could be 40 million. So, and it seems to me there's a lot of blame game going on here. For example, if you talk to somebody in the city, they'll say, well, our state reps didn't do a good job getting us enough money. So something has to give here.
And Jack Newell says, thank you, Frack. We'd be in a lot more trouble without you. So, Mohit, I don't know if I let you finish that. Can you think of other specifics of stuff you cut? Can we cut? They actually said we're down. I think it's about 70 positions or more in the police department that we're filling one
police,
class. They said cancel the second class.
Sure. So we discussed this at our last Frack meeting. Police, we're budgeted for 490. We have about 430 in there. So I've just done a very brief comparison.
And there'll be another 10 leaving probably in the end of the month.
Unfortunately, there always are. I've done a brief comparison across peer cities. We're high. So, most of our peer cities are in the 300 somewhere in terms of police staffing.
But we also have less crime.
We have less crime. We are a more vibrant city, more diverse. There's a reason we've chosen to do policing the way we do. And, if that's what works for the city, that so be it. But the comparison to other cities is that we might be a little bit overstaffed in police. I haven't looked at fire that carefully, though I know and everyone recognizes that the minimum staffing rules in New Haven are quite generous to the firefighters.
What would be an example of minimum staffing rule we have that other people don't have?
We got these numbers at the last meeting. I don't have them in front of me, but I believe we have something. I forget the units, but our minimum staffing is 72 and Bridgeport is 64.
Meaning per shift?
But exactly. So I don't remember the units. I think that sounds right.
Is Bridgeport bigger land or less than we have?
Bridgeport has more people than we do. On a land size, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Okay. And which is the relevant number?
That's a good question. When it comes to fire, it's remember the majority of fire calls now, something like 70%, are for medical. So the number of people.
About that? Now, Rob Smuts, who was a smart guy, who was a city chief administrative officer, and he was in charge of fire department at City Hall. And at first he said, we're wasting a lot of money, too many firehouses, et cetera, medical. But then he came to the idea that we have to modernize how we do medical, but he did not believe that we'd actually be able to save money in the end. We send a truck on medical calls, right? Do we need to send trucks on medical calls? We save money if we didn't?
I've had people complain to me about how we respond to medical calls. No, we do get reimbursed by insurance for transports, for medical transports. But that aside, I think it's valid to. It's something I'm interested in. I want to learn more about how other cities, how other fire departments go about responding to medical.
You want to learn more. The DFA of New Haven tweets out your comment, Mohit. New Haven's most indebted city in Connecticut, approximately $1.5 billion. He says $12K per person. You said $10K, right?
It's a little bit over $10K.
Yeah, and $1.5 billion. Wow. So have you heard anything, Alan, that changes your mind at all? Like if you were in this position and you didn't would you still feel we should just tell them cut 5%? You still feel like we can't raise taxes anymore?
I definitely, I feel
Because you said it deals when everyone leaves happy but gives up something. It sounds like if we're going to get rid of another $30 million in a structural deficit, that might include some tax increases.
Well, what I would say to you is that Mo had the best, since we've been here, the one point you made to me really resonates. If you bring people together, believe it or not, and you're in the situation that you're in now, something's going to give. Either Yale's going to have to give a little more money, maybe the hospital's going to have to put
up. But
it's
not a little. Like if they each gave us $5 million more, we'd still be $20 million down.
Right, but the point is, what direction are you going? And you have to. Perception has a lot to do with people believing in the system. If people see that we're making progress, instead of all this rhetoric about everyone blaming the other person, that's not going to work. But if you bring, the fire department, the police department, the Board of Ed, and some other, like you were talking about, cutting fees to some of these Wall Street firms, you're going to make some progress. I will bet my life, because there's no choice here.
Yeah. Now the minimum education requirement, MER. So Mohit, there's nothing we can do to cut further than the Board of Ed under state law?
That's my understanding. 2 quick points on the DFA. The 10,000 plus number comes from the state. They are underestimating our pension deficits because they're using our number of 7.75% returns. So if you use my numbers, I think 12,000 is a more reasonable answer. To Alan's point, I think it's important for, I think the role that FRAC wants to play right now is to be a critical information source. And we want to catalyze the conversation, make sure that folks in the city understand what's going on, and understand, unfortunately, that there are no easy solutions.
Well, under you, Mohit, I would argue that you have done that job in a great way. I think everyone on all sides has been so thankful that in this complicated, difficult, and important discussion, you've been presenting good information. Here's my challenge to you. You don't have to take a stand on what should or shouldn't be done, but we need more specifics. How soon are you going to have a sense of what it would take, what kind of specific cuts would happen in the fire department, what specific cuts in the police department, what are options around the MER, if any, or any kind of new revenue enhancements that would get us what Alan was talking about toward that goal?
I mean, FRAC can look very closely at potential savings. That's something we haven't done. Our big picture so far has been to identify what the deficit is.
And that's important. Yeah.
And what the driving issues are, which are pension and medical, right? So police and fire are areas we can cut, but pension and medical are areas that are really driving our long-term problems.
And that we have been having newer hires, especially in the police department, other places, having to get lower pension benefits than the older hires. That's happening statewide. And I think paying more for health care. We just got a big contract with 3144, the supervisors union that did that. Is that the answer? What do you think? Do we have to go to 401k plans, which I'm not a big fan of?
For pensions, our employees don't get Social Security in the city. So, they do receive 457 benefits. They're able to save on their own in a tax-deferred fashion. That's great. But, when they don't get Social Security, it probably makes sense to have an alternative defined benefit plan for them. For the health benefits, Adam Marston and I have spoken about this. It's important to keep in mind that high deductible plans lead to individuals making suboptimal decisions. Right? You look at the studies of behind high deductible plans. Yes, they save money, but where they save money is that people somewhat randomly cut back on the healthcare that they consume, on good things and bad things. And so, at some point, we have to realize that as a country, we have a broken pricing system, and as a city,
we need single-payer health care.
At a minimum, we need something to fix our pricing system, right?
So Jeff Klaus tweets, all the debt incurred under, quote, progressive political leadership. Question, will it still be progressive when the most vulnerable citizens in our city lose their housing, become food insecure, scrimp on prescriptions, and won't be able to find a cop when they need one? Jeff, thanks for tweeting in, and my question to you is going to be, what are you going to cut? Could they get, if we got rid of magnet schools and we got rid of suburban students, how would that affect our MER? Or do we get enough reimbursement for magnet students that that's not relevant? Or is it that we have obligations to them because we got the money to build those magnet schools and therefore would forfeit money? Or could we go to the state and say, take that burden off us?
I don't know the answer to that. I can look into it.
I have a question for Mohit. I mean, is it feasible in your mind that you could bring people together knowing that we're almost in a crisis situation?
Well, we're in a crisis situation financially. That's Mohit's point.
Right. And we're agreeing on this. So my question is, how difficult would it be to bring these people together, sit them down, and see if some progress could be made?
I mean, clearly the Yale's at the table. I mean, I know that they've been talking to the city. With regard to the state, that's the other major actor here.
Right.
There hasn't been much progress made whatsoever. And I think a lot of that
we're going to get a Republican governor, and I went to that debate, and they're not too big on cities. They say you got to sweat it and make it yourself. And they're not all wrong about the Hartford bailout.
So I think the big thing people are waiting for is to figure out what happens in November. Yeah. Right. With a Republican governor, we're probably on our own, and we're probably going to have these hard decisions made between our unions, our city residents in terms of taxes, and then Yale in terms of their contribution.
And what leverage do we have with unions? Like, do we say, when I try to put myself in the position of people who know so much more than I do because they deal with it every day, I always wonder, can't we sit at the table and say, we're for unions, and we're going to show you all the hard numbers, and we don't want to lay off people, we don't want to cut back in health care, so help us find a solution that you're going to agree with but still deals with this problem. And do we have leverage like that where we say that if you don't do that, we're just going to cut 10% of your workforce? Or is there enough bumping problems? I remember early in the Delito administration, they tried something like that. And I remember they had like people automatically bump into positions under work rules where, for instance, there was a non-Spanish speaking person put as the Spanish speaking librarian. I mean, is it that kind of mess? Or do we have leverage? Or could we tell unions, look, we want you to do the solution with you, but if you don't, we're just cutting 10% of your workforce?
Look, there's always leverage. Now, the question is that the way the city and the politicians want to go? The state also has given us more leverage by putting up, this MARB, this Municipal Accountability Review Board. So, the city of New Haven could approach MARB. We could be a tier 2 or a tier 3 city. We're somewhere in there. And what that means is that the state...
But we give up a lot of leverage to run our own city.
Well, I mean, what we do is, the way I see MARB is that there's really two roles. One is that MARB looks very closely at the assumptions. MARB would not have approved the budget we passed a few weeks ago. Why? Because that budget has a structural deficit that's going to require us to either not pay the pensions or do some weird debt service bonding stuff in the next few months, right? And so we're going to see all that. And this budget would not have passed if we had been under MARB supervision.
So basically, MARB is a way of saying from cities, we don't have the guts to really make the decisions ourselves, so your daddy's going to come in and tell the unions too bad.
I'm sorry, it's being done right now in West Haven. I mean, West Haven, their final yesterday, MARB just turned down
West Haven.
Turned down, and they're almost at a tier 4 now, because I happen to also own a lot of property there, and I'm very familiar with what's going on.
And how do you compare owning property in two cities based on how the cities run their budgets?
Honestly, I don't think either of them are very good. I mean, in my opinion, I just don't think it's just.
Soma, you think we should go get under the umbrella of MARB?
Well, you ask about, so two things. You ask about leverage, and MARB gives us leverage, right? Because MARB has to approve any new union contracts. That's a tier 3 issue.
Yep.
Tier 4 means they reopen contracts. And so if we intend to seriously take on structural costs that are built into our union contracts, that's one way to go. Now, the question is, are there costs in there? Aside from the fire minimum staffing rules, I haven't actually come across them. But that's something that, we're interested in learning more about. You asked when we're going to have, our solutions out. FRAC is required to put out a 5-year financial plan, every so often. We haven't done one since 2010. And that's something we're very interested in pursuing. So we can actually look at these issues more deeply, do a comparative cost study for police and fire, our other major cost areas, versus other cities.
What do we get with MARB? Do they give us more money? They take for our debt?
That's right. So MARB opens up 2 sources of financing. One is a budgeted line item of $28 million. So some of that $28 million could be given to the city. The second is a Hartford-style bailout. Now, will that happen under a new governor? I don't know. But, those are the 2 funding sources.
Ned Lamont even said, the leading Democratic candidate for governor said, what they did is they made Wall Street people rich on that bailout, but it's not going to help Hartford.
Sure. I mean, they made folks whole on their bonds. I got to tell you, my instinct is that we should solve our problems ourselves. DFA writes in, didn't former Alder Mike Stratton successfully challenge the notion that cutting school budget would put New Haven at risk of violating its MBR? What is it? It is the MBR, the minimum budget requirement, I believe it's
for
called.
Schools.
Yeah.
If you count city pension contributions to MBR. So is that true that there are different ways of calculating MBR and that you're allowed to include, or was that one of Michael's middle of the night deranged
I don't know the answer to that. I can find out. Usually the MBR is calculated on the general fund budgeted amount.
Because if Michael were right, wouldn't every city be doing that right now?
I don't think there's a lot of political pressure to cut education. Right, I mean
that is an investment, right? So if we say we cut education, that's again like
Alan. How do you define cutting education? I mean,
they're going to talk about bigger class size, fewer teachers, closing schools.
But a lot of the criticism, again, I'm not privy to this because I'm not there. From what I read, a lot of people say that there's just too much in the downtown where there's a lot.
I knew you were going to say that. Everyone always says cut administrators, and for 20 years, I never heard them mention one single school administration position to be cut.
Well, that's my point.
Mohit, you've looked at it. Are we top heavy with administrators in the schools?
Not necessarily. I mean, our numbers are pretty similar to what they are in Bridgeport and Hartford. So
no one's ever told me, everyone wants to bring the torch mob and burn down Meadow Street and decimate every administrator. But you have to send back the grant proposal. If you get money from the state, you have to file the report. You got to hire the supervisors. You got to discipline people who do wrong. You got to negotiate contracts. You got to make sure the buses run and people. I mean, if we don't have people right now, I know people in the schools are doing 3 jobs that one people used to do, which maybe is okay. That's part of how we modernize. But I'm really, Alan, when I hear that thing about administrators. And I hate top-heavy bureaucracy. At the Independent, we don't have it. I was carrying up the air conditioner and that kind of stuff. But
you're bringing in guys like us.
Yeah. But I never hear a single actual administrator you could cut.
Well, again, I don't know it that well, so I'm not going to. I've just saying
either.
What,
I'm just
a lot
saying
of
no
the criticism. Again, it all goes back to if you bring somebody independent in here, you might get a clearer picture of what is going on. And that really, I think, is the way you got to move here because, it's like I keep repeating myself. It's the blame game, and that's not going to work. Only thing that's going to work is getting people at the table and making some concessions.
Amen. What do you think?
Everyone's got to be at the table, and I think the most important seat there has got to be the city residents. So folks need to be informed. Come to our next FRAC meeting. We've got a survey online. Folks can fill out bit.ly/2J0VJF1. We'll put it in the comments under this video. But fill out the survey and learn more about FRAC and learn more about your city. Most importantly.
Well, I want to thank. These are tough discussions to have. I want to thank Alan Hadelman. Has always been one of the great citizens of New Haven, even though he doesn't get his name out there in headlines. And I want to thank Mohit Agrawal, one of the new great citizens of New Haven, who's been leading FRAC, our Financial Review and Audit Commission, which is giving us a little light in the tunnel of darkness of our city finances. Folks, thanks for listening. Thanks, everybody, for your tweets, your comments on Facebook Live. Thanks, Harry Drost, the best station manager in the business, who helped us man all these different flows of information and keep the lights on. Thanks for joining us today in Dateline New Haven. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book your flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.